I'm delighted to officially open the show Invisible Inventories, which has been at first inaugurated in Nairobi and is now to be seen in Cologne. The IIP project is about absence and loss, about amnesia. It's about a traumatic experience of being dispossessed of its belongings, mythologies and philosophies, history, identity and memory. It is amputation, it is a cut, it is internal bleeding. I want to quote Jim Chuchu, one of the artists of this show, and he says, and I cite, "The thing about absence is that you can feel it. You can see the corners and the boundaries of it, but you don't know what the absence is." This exhibition is about colonial violence, it's about colonial trauma, about the impact of colonialism, which has left deep traces in collective and individual memory. If the exhibition in Nairobi recounted absence and amputation, here in Cologne it recognizes the opulence, the abundance. What does this epistemic violence mean? The Invisible Inventory project is a 2-year research and exhibition project. During those 2 years, the Kenyan Collections and the German-French Shift Collective have been working with museum professionals from the National Kenyan Museum in Nairobi, the Rautenstrauch-Joest Museum in Cologne, and the Weltkulturen Museum in Frankfurt. Together, they realized a database of 30,501 Kenyan cultural artifacts spread across 30 European and North American museums. This database is also online and will enable us to finally have a realistic overview of Kenyan objects in museums of the global north. One of the most impressive works of the exhibition is a continuous band of 30,501 shipping labels printed using the object information from the database. They are printed in the exhibition space and appropriate the museum space. They literally surround, tie up the museum until it ends in the streets of Cologne. It is as if the museum is drowned by numbers and labels, strangled by its own system of numbering and taxonomies. This series of 3 exhibitions, the first in Nairobi, the second in Cologne, and the third in Frankfurt, attempts to dismantle the colonial narrative, the museum's narrative that has been far too one-sided. I am truly convinced that this project can lead to many other projects and enable future restitution processes. I want to address my special thanks to the 2 artist collectives, the Nest and the Shift, who had this wonderful initiative and made this all happen. I would also like to thank the different curators and experts from the National Museums of Kenya, the Weltkulturen Museum in Frankfurt, and particularly Clara Himmelheber, curator of the African collections here at the Rautenstrauch-Joest Museum in Cologne, who supported this project with passion and determination for our part of the project. At last but not least, of course, I would like to thank the Goethe Institute, the bodies who coordinated this 2 years project, and the support of the Kulturstiftung des Bundes. Thanks for sharing us this important evening. Let's see and hear what this exhibition is really about.
Hi, Jerry.
Hi, I thought the meeting was earlier. Gosh, I tried going in and I thought it had ended because we had a blackout. Now I'm seeing again the time.
The Invisible Inventories exhibition that we are opening in Cologne today is part of a bigger project called the International Inventories Programme that all of us and many more people that are not with us in this frame right now have been working on since 2018, since more than 3 years now. So we are very happy that we made it so far and can open this exhibition. Sam, tell us a bit more, please.
A good way of starting to talk about the project is that we bring together quite different institutions. So we bring together museums, we bring together artist collectives, we bring together artist research, we bring together academic research, and we all share a set of, I think, hopes and expectations, but they're also slightly different. So it's necessarily heterogeneous, let's say it like that, and that's really important, a part of the project.
We also produce a magazine that accompanies this exhibition project that extends on the views of the different partners. And of course, one of the central parts of this project is the database, which all the research and also the content in the exhibition is based on.
One is that it was important from the beginning that this is a project which is very much anchored in Nairobi. And there have been other so-called critical engagements with collections of the North, which are tended to have been in the North. And the position of us as IIP from the beginning was that this is a project which is sort of epistemologically and emotionally and sort of spiritually rooted in Nairobi. What's important is the involvement of artists in this project. It's also an artist initiative, which then went to the museums and asked them if they would like to be involved. And why that's important, at least, and from my perspective, is that that opens up the possibility of a form of institutional critique. So if we're trying to question ways in which objects are, the apparatus involved in the storage, in the possession, in the showcasing, in around these objects, then maybe it's hard to do that as the institution itself, and hence the logic to involve actors beyond the institution to work with the institution to try to critically reflect on that.
I think even institution has changed their perspectives as they view, as they listen to what people, the conversation that are ongoing. NMK has undergone massive transformation from the discussions we're having with Njoki and Jim in that room in 2017, actually, when we first met at the end of 2017. I did find you to be quite abrasive and unrealistic. And I said, how can you approach the world like that? And then the position of NMK that time, you remember, we said, our director general used to say, NMK is not interested in institution. Objects are our cultural ambassadors. They can stay wherever they are. But fast thing forward, now NMK is at the forefront of even advising the president that objects need to come back.
We've had one exhibition that has happened in Nairobi, and we must say that it was a success in that we've been able to receive many guests, and we've also been able to provide for a platform for Kenyans to engage with this discussion and on the topic of restitution in a different kind of way, where you just see people coming and looking at the exhibition. I also would like to say that we initially had foreseen or thought of this exhibition in a different way. That we had thought that the Nairobi exhibition, for instance, was going to be an opportunity, just like anybody else, to bring out objects that people have never seen, like bring objects from Cologne and from other parts of the world as part of saying that this is what we mean, that objects need to come home. but we never managed to bring any of these exhibitions. And somebody may ask why.
The problem really was that it would have been far too expensive for our budget to bring the objects to Kenya. But I think you made the best out of it by making this absence really the topic of your exhibition. And I think like you made something good out of the worst thing which could happen, that the objects couldn't travel. And the absence is now like the topic of your exhibition, isn't it?
But we also did what we are calling an absence installation. We worked with local artists, young artists known as Tuzi creatives. They created imaginations, imagery. They used the images of the objects the way they are, and then recreated how they may have been used. So we still had our showcases, but with nothing inside, well lit with the labels, and then saying that that object that would have been where there was a label, we say this would have been the object, but it's currently in Cologne, for instance. It's like a situation of saying, I already have a house. I'm waiting for someone to come and occupy it. So I mean, that's how it turned out. So it was really good.
For us, the objects are not absent, but they are present. So what I thought, or what we thought would be interesting for our audiences, is to make these invisible inventories visible. So we decided to really exhibit all the 82 Kenyan objects which we have in our collection, and to kind of present them in a way as you have seen them when you came to Germany once for the workshop. So they are all on working tables, and for everyone to look at them and to really do some research on them. That was our idea. But there's also a second part to it, as we talked about these objects of national interest. And you did research on that in Kenya as well, did you?
Oh yes, we did research on the Kenyan objects. So we are calling the objects of Kenyan of national importance. And in the exhibition, we had a special corner for them. Objects of national importance are not only objects from Cologne or from Germany.
It's not only the absent objects and the present objects, but also created artworks by two artists collectives that have worked and also researched in the process over 3 years, and have created these artworks that Jerry has mentioned earlier on, like the shipping labels by the Nest, the research on the Pokomo trams, and also the Simbambili installation by Shift Collective, and other works that are to be seen in all three exhibitions, that are kind of linking all three exhibitions.
In the Nairobi space, I remember we would meet our friends and we were all excited to say, hey, thanks for coming. But then we would find that for them, they had just gone through something emotional. And so for them, they were a bit more kind of sad or angry. And so I remember being confused because I was happy to see people, but then they were in a much darker space. And so I'm curious about what the emotional landscape will be for the German exhibitions emotionally, because I think that's the thing that is very difficult to capture in words about what is the kind of overall emotional landscape for the German shows, because I feel like that's where human beings will connect on this issue. This conversation has gone on for decades, and it's been about logic, about law, but when we talk about emotion, I don't think enough has been done to explore that.
There has been the public programs that are called the Object Movement Dialogues, which we will hear more about later today, and which was very important to engage the public in this discourse of object movement or potential object movement in the future, and how the Kenyan public, but also a German public, would feel about this potential object movement.
Being able to present our constant evolving thoughts under different thematic areas under the banner of what we call the Object Movement Dialogues has been incredibly illuminating.
To recognize here, even before we delve into everything else I'm supposed to do, is to recognize the shifting position that has happened in the course of our own interaction. And so we recognize the primacy of the communities who are the creators, the creative brains behind these objects. And therefore, even as an institution, we kind of decided that the only way of engaging with the public and listening to their views is by involving them to talk for themselves instead of talking on their behalf. And so one of the things with our involvement in object movement dialogue has always been making the communities expert themselves. And in talking to them has always just been to give them opportunity to talk about their losses and how they feel about it. And in that process, one of the things that came out is that the communities are also not vindictive. The anger is there, but they cannot direct the anger at the second or the third generation of people who did terrible things to them. They recognize that it's not the mistake of the people who hold the objects now, but they are very keen that the people who are holding the object now can also right the wrongs of the past. That way, they will find a way of doing forgiveness if the objects are not moving. And for them, they will want to engage with these museums without really looking at the politics of provenance. So that if you tell them, okay, your object, it's in this museum, but we are trying to find out how it got there before we can decide whether it should come back. They find that one a bit disturbing. But NMK as an institution, we are also recognizing the fact that communities are questioning our own ownership of objects. So there's one of the big debates in object movement dialogue has always been, where do objects go when they come back? Should they go to NMK? And we have had various cases where people deny or they don't even want to have that. Imagine it, that when objects come and then you take them to national museums of Kenya, you'll just have replaced one atrocity with another. And so this process of listening communities also make us also question our own ownership of these objects. OMD has really been that kind of a push factor in even having institutions change their position as they listen to what community members expect and want them to do.
There's a really beautiful thing you said, which is that we are also community members in our own right, decentralized, and that we look to the public as an agent in their own culture making, as an agent in their own cultural narrative building.
OMD debates and engagement with the public, you find that there's been a lot of intergenerational connections. Because we have the elderly people with experiences, different stories they had from their grandfathers and their fathers about how objects left. And so whenever you bring objects, whether it's a digital repatriation or a photograph, and we are talking about this, the younger generation then become more aware. We are now having to deal with laws that we never created and which are hindering the return of those objects. Yet they think if the absence of these objects, the ways in which they were acquired would be looked at as violations of human rights, as outright theft, which is criminal, then the entire premise of European Museum and American Museum and any other foreign museum holding African objects will crumble, and therefore the moral obligation to right those wrongs and do justice to the communities will outweigh any other argument that are currently being used to block the return of those objects. So OMD to me has been that incredible engagement in which I learned so much from the communities we engaged with, and I see things differently. So it has also been a learning process for me as a community member and also as a museum professional.
The database also started in 2018 when we decided to reach out to museums. Up to today, we have contacted 40 museums worldwide. And out of these 40, we have around 30 who reacted positively and who handed in their data. And of course, it was a very difficult undertaking because we didn't know at all how the museums would react. And back then, we were also not sure if they would at all give some information. So I'm happy that today we have, for example, from all the German museums, we received the information about the Kenyan objects that they store. And together with the colleagues from the National Museum in Nairobi, who is George Juma Ondeng, Lydia Nafula, and Philemon Yamanga, we reached out to different museums worldwide. And it's just nice to see that data comes in, and it was a real challenge to organize these data.
Chichu from the NAS Collective, I would take over from Simon and the NMK team in terms of taking the data and putting it into the database, which proved to be the kind of work that is both logistical and technical, but also had some emotional elements, because then it was interesting to see these words and numbers that then that represented things that some people have really been looking for a long time, and that represent maybe some difficult histories. So that was an interesting kind of place to sit and look at data as representing human activity or human history. One of the interesting things about working on the database was seeing how much work was needed beyond translating, but also looking at the ways that communities were named, for instance, using names that are no longer in effect, or maybe have become derogatory, or maybe for tribes that don't exist anymore because they were kind of cut across by the colonial borders, or maybe even kind of married into non-existence. So that was interesting. It was also interesting to look at what kind of things were collected by what kind of collectors, how the interests of people based on what their expertise was or what their profession was kind of influenced their collecting and their aesthetics. That was also quite interesting to see. I think one of the most important thing that I learned is that this question of capacity, which is a question that has been often raised in the question of object movement, that there is some things to unpack there, because is it possible for European institutions to have more capacity to understand this data about African people? That's a question that maybe is interesting to unpack whenever the question of capacity comes up in these conversations. And so after 2 years of working on this database, it's now time for us to kind of make it public, which is an interesting thing to witness, both because we know that there are people who are eagerly waiting to see the database and interact with it for all kinds of reasons and all kinds of intentions, and that will be interesting to see play out. But it's also a moment for this project to feel like this was the point of struggling for all this time to put this data together, and we hope that the outcome is something that's useful beyond the project and to many more people. Simon, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really an important day today, because it's like cutting a ribbon of and unveiling and making public what we have worked on for a long time.
And the last thing I can add is that this database is one of a kind. I don't think this data has ever been put together in this way. So thank you.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, liebe Zuschauerinnen und Zuschauer. Wer sind die Menschen, die ein Objekt, das nach Europa gebracht wurde, zurückgelassen hat? Und wenn das Objekt in die Gesellschaft zurückkehren soll, die seiner beraubt wurde, wer sind dann die Menschen, denen das Objekt begegnet? Diese Fragen hat die kenianische Kuratorin Njoki Ngumi in einem der Dialoge des International Inventories Programme an das Publikum gestellt. Die Abwesenheit wichtiger Kulturobjekte hat historische Brüche in der kenianischen Gesellschaft provoziert. Sie hat die Kontinuität kultureller Traditionen untergraben. Bei der kürzlich eröffneten Ausstellung im Nationalmuseum in Nairobi waren die Vitrinen darum leer. In der heute eröffneten Ausstellung im Rautenstrauch-Joest Museum sehen wir genau die Objekte, die eigentlich in Kenia sein sollten. Was bedeutet ihre Anwesenheit in Köln für das deutsche Publikum? Und was für die digital zugeschalteten Kenianer? Solche Perspektivwechsel führen uns mitten hinein in das schwierige, schmerzhafte und mit Erinnerungen an Gewalt und Enteignung belastete Thema des kolonialen Erbes. Sie ermutigen aber auch, Objektbiografien zu erkunden, um damit die Möglichkeiten neuer, zukunftsfähiger Verbindungen auszuloten. In den letzten Wochen und Monaten hat die Diskussion um die Rückgabe kolonialer Objekte an Fahrt aufgenommen. Endlich bewegt sich etwas in den deutschen und europäischen Museen und kulturpolitischen Institutionen. Doch wir sind noch lange nicht am Ende. Wir müssen unser Denken und Handeln weiter dekolonisieren. Wir müssen globale Machtstrukturen, wie sie die Ausstellung Invisible Inventories zeigt, noch weiter hinterfragen. Dafür braucht es den kontinuierlichen, offenen und respektvollen Austausch zwischen Deutschland und den ehemaligen Kolonien, zwischen Europa und Afrika. Das Goethe-Institut setzt sich schon seit einigen Jahren für einen solchen Austausch ein. Die enge Zusammenarbeit der deutschen und kenianischen Partnerinnen im International Inventories Programme zeigt eindrücklich, wie eine vertrauensvolle Kooperation zwischen afrikanischen und deutschen Museen aussehen kann. Seit 2018 arbeiten die involvierten KünstlerInnen, Kollektive, Museen und das Goethe-Institut intensiv an der Frage, wie abwesende Kulturobjekte in Kenia wieder zugänglich gemacht werden können. Die Ausstellung ist ein zentrales Ergebnis ihrer Arbeit. Ein weiteres, mindestens ebenso wichtiges Resultat ist eine umfassende Datenbank kenianischer Objekte in aller Welt. Ich freue mich, dass diese Datenbank heute erstmals der Öffentlichkeit zugänglich gemacht wird. Damit haben die Beteiligten den Weg geebnet für einen offeneren Zugang aller Interessierten zu den Archiven und Sammlungen. Dies weiter voranzutreiben, bleibt ein wichtiges Ziel. Mein Dank gilt allen beteiligten Partnern in Kenia und Deutschland, namentlich auch der Kulturstiftung des Bundes, die dieses Projekt unterstützt haben. Ich wünsche Ihnen viel Freude bei der Ausstellung.